Alright, so taking what we've learned in the chain link example, let's do something a little bit more organic. So I'm going to go create a new canvas, and I'm going to grab the cylinder 3D, make it a polymesh 3D. I'm going to go across the x-axis here while I'm editing it. I'll hold down Control Shift, and I'm going to use Clip Curve to kind of clip this into the shape I want. It's kind of profile of a tentacle here. Let's go ahead and round these edges out just a little bit. So here's our basic tentacle, and what we're going to need is one part that's no suckers on the bottom of the tentacle, and then the other two are going to have suckers. So what I'm going to do is go to Subtool, hit Duplicate. I'm going to go into Transpose. I'm going to move one of these up. So I'm going to put suckers on these ones. So let's go into polyframe mode and hold down Control. I'm going to mask out this center area here. I'm going to hit Control W to make its own polygroup. I'm going to go to Brush, hit I for Insert. I'm going to insert a half cylinder here. I'm just going to drag this over this polygroup. I'm going to Control drag twice. I'm going to merge these two together. And now let's go ahead and edit this a little bit so we can get a little bit of a more sucker detail in here. So what I'm going to do is hold down Control Shift, and then we'll grab the select rectangle. We'll just grab this end cap right here. We'll go to Polygroups, and we'll group visible. This will just make it easier to select later on. So I'm going to hold down Control Shift and isolate that. Hold down Control and tap to mask this. Control Shift to bring everything back, and then Control tap again to invert that selection. Now with my transpose, I can go ahead and start modifying this end cap here. The cool new thing with the transpose line is no matter where I tap on it now, it's going to take that surface normal underlying where I tapped it and point straight out from that surface normal. So if I want to come straight out from this point, all I have to do is tap on it and it goes straight out. So I'm going to make some edge rings here. So with this masked out, I'm going to hold down Control and right click this end piece right here. Oops, I need to go out of move mode and go into scale mode. So I'm going to hit E and then Control, right click this endpoint, and what that's going to do is actually going to create edge loops. So while I drag in, it's going to create an edge loop, and I'm just going to keep doing that. I'm going to do one more, and I'm actually just going to keep dragging that in. So this will be kind of the tentacle sucker part, and now here's our inner sucker part. I'm going to go ahead and hold down Control again and drag that in to give us an extra edge ring. Then I'm going to move this back in to kind of get the inner part of that tentacle, or that sucker part. So I'm going to hit W this time, and I'm going to hit Control and then hold down Shift and grab this middle one and just start moving this back, and that's going to extrude this face. So I'm going to go back just a little bit and then stop, and then hold down Control Shift and drag back more. So now here's the inner part, and then stop, Control Shift, drag back a little bit more. So what I'm doing is adding a bunch of edge loops, so when I go to smooth this later, it'll maintain those edges nicely. And if I want to, I can go back into scale mode and then Control right click this, and we'll add another edge loop in here. So I go ahead and unmask, and now I'm going to turn off polyframe and show you that when I go to geometry and then smooth divide this, how nicely it's going to maintain those edges. It's not, you don't have to do that if you don't want to, but it's certainly an option. And so now we've got our bottom piece here with no sucker. We've got our middle piece here, and let's go ahead and just duplicate this middle piece out. I'm going to hold down Control Shift and just drag out a copy of this. So just like the chain link, it all needs to be one subtool with different polygroups. So I'm going to grab this first one, and let's go ahead and move this so that it penetrates just a little bit through here, because it's organic, so it's going to be separate pieces, but we kind of want to give it the illusion that it's not, that it's all one piece. So I'm going to go ahead and have this top one selected. I'm going to do merge down, so now they're all one subtool here, but we need to make them different polygroups. So let's go ahead and do anything that's not vert welded. You can actually go down here to polygroups and do auto groups, and it'll just automatically group any groups that aren't vert welded. So that did a perfect job for us. And in fact, I'm going to need this top part to interpenetrate this bottom part just a little bit. So I'm going to move that down. There we go. So now we've got our insert brush ready to go, our 3 poly groups here. So I'm going to go you need to orient it first. I'm just going to orient it so that we're just looking straight at it. Just like the chain link, I'm going to hit B, create insert mesh, and we're good to go. So let's go out of edit mode, clear our canvas, let's grab a cube 3D, let's make it a poly mesh so we can edit on it. And again, we got our squid mesh here, so when I drag it out, it's going to create it as an insert brush. But all we have to do is turn on curve mode, and we've got the beginnings of our tentacle brush here. Now, if you're following along and you're having problems, always remember you can go back to your original working mesh and modify it, and then come back in and test it out as a curve brush. So, for example, I can go back here to, let's go ahead and edit, clear my canvas. I can go back to my working mesh here. So here it is. Let's say, you know what? I want to go down here to geometry. I actually do want to divide this by default, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this line. So I'm going to move this up just a tad. There we go. So I actually do want it a little bit smoother, and I want to make sure these are all penetrating enough so that it gives the illusion of being organic. Alright, so I actually like this a little bit better. So I'm going to go in here and hit B, and all I got to do is create insert mesh again. Now I've got a brand new one that I can go and play with. So we'll go ahead and grab that cube again, and you can keep jumping back and forth as many times as you need to get your brush right set up. So we'll go ahead and turn our curve mode. There we go. So now we've got our squid brush that's a little bit smoother, a little bit more geo, but that's alright. And now we can start making modifications to make this even more squid-like. And there's a couple of adjustments I want to make right off the bat, and that is the fact that it doesn't actually taper. So a tentacle, starts out thick and then tapers to the end. So easy way to do that. Underneath the brush options, go ahead and go to the modifiers and turn on the soft curve right here. What that's going to do is if I go back up here to the stroke palette and then I go to the size, turn that on, and I click again, it's actually going to start tapering my mesh. Let's go ahead and make it a little bit bigger so you can see what we're doing. So you can see where I tapped on this end, it makes it wider, and then it kind of tapers thinner, which is pretty much exactly what I want. If you want to play with that taper a little bit more, you can just crank that down a little bit and then tap again. Now if I tap this side, it's going to taper the opposite way, so it just depends on what side you tap on. So we'll go ahead and leave that on. Another thing you'll notice is that it's actually pretty faceted. It almost looks like Legos. So let's go ahead and smooth that out. I'm going to go back down to my brush options here, underneath the modifiers, and right here where it says curve res, I'm going to put that up to like 5. And then when I go back in here, you're going to see it's nice and smooth now. So now it's looking really tentacly. I don't know if tentacly is a word, but it looks a lot better. If you wanted to make it thicker through here, this one's actually pretty decent thickness. I don't mind that, but if you want to make it a little bit thicker, remember, since we're cranked out at our Z intensity over here, you can go to your strength multiplier. Let's say we want that to be like 1.5. There we go. Give a little bit more meat to this tentacle here. And you'll also notice this behavior. So I'm going to drag this tentacle out, and as I kind of drag it around, it's able to overlap on itself. And you can actually control that right here underneath the modifiers where it says max bend angle. So if I turn that down to 0 and then go here, it's actually not going to let me wrap over itself anymore. So this kind of keeps you in check. However, if I crank this all the way up to 90, I can really just curve the heck out of this curve right here and overlap with itself as much as I want. So kind of play with this. Depending on what you're making, you may or may not want more or less of that max bend angle. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at the default of 45 here. That feels pretty good for a tentacle. And outside of the max bend angle and the curve res, there's actually another smoothing thing you can do. Let's go ahead and drag out. Let's make a new copy of this thing. Okay. Actually, let's make it a little bit longer. So remember, again, if I go to the end of this thing and I get that little rubber band, I can continue this stroke out and just keep making a longer and longer tentacle. If we go back up to our stroke palette up here, you might have noticed there's actually a smooth button over here. What that does, and you'll see the hotkey pop up, that's actually 6. If I'm moving my curve around and it's like, I kind of like this, I just wish it was smoother, you can hit 6 and you'll see that your curve actually updates. Your mesh doesn't yet. All you got to do is tap and it'll update to that new smooth curve. So you can actually, here's the slider, so for the curve smoothness, if that smoothed a little bit too much for you, you can crank that down, let's say to 1, and now when I hit 6, the curve will just smooth just slightly. So I can just keep hitting 6 to kind of smooth these curves out. So you can use that to your advantage as well. And so now that we have a cool new brush, let's go ahead and go back to our guy real quick. We haven't seen him in a while. Let's go ahead and select him, and I'm going to go ahead and isolate his head out this time. There we go. So we've got our tentacle brush, and let's go ahead and I'm going to turn off X symmetries and make this a little bit more random. I'm going to drag a tentacle out, Of course, you can go in here and modify it however you want. Now, for a tentacle, if I have a point where I want these tentacles to come out of, it might be a good idea to go over here and hit this lock start button. So what that's going to do is it's going to kind of lock this origin point, and as I move this around, it's going to not let me move past it. It will let you move the origin point around if you select it specifically, but once you leave it alone, it'll actually allow you to go over here and move the other parts of the tentacle around. And once you get a tentacle or something that you like, you can actually take a snapshot by hitting the 5 key, and then you can just drag off a copy. So it'll leave the original back there, and you can drag off a copy. So you can just make really quick tentacle changes here. And you'll notice we have bend and snap on. So bend is allowing me to update this mesh, and snap is snapping it to the underlying meshes. If it's snapping a little bit too much, you can turn that off temporarily and move it around, and it might be a little bit freer for you. And of course, if you're back here and you do actually want it to snap to a mesh, you want to turn that back on. And another option is actually turn that bend off. So let's say I really like this tentacle and I want to make an exact copy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit 5, and with bend off, if I grab that copy, I can just grab a copy without it squirming all over the place. So you can just keep doing this. You actually make, you know, repetitive patterns and stuff like that. So use that to your advantage as well. But of course, you can always, if you want to, turn bend back on once you move it out to where you want it to go, and then you can move it back into place here.